All right. So, welcome everybody. Today we are going to be talking about edible landscaping. My name is Tia, and we have Jan Ignash with us. And I'm the extension agent with UF IFAS Extension Hillsborough County. And Jan is one of our master gardener volunteers who has a lifetime of experience working with fruits and vegetables in her homestead. So let's get started here. So here is an infographic about Florida-friendly edible landscaping. And in a nutshell is kind of what we're going to be talking about today. Growing fruits and vegetables in your own backyard in an environmentally friendly way. You can see the picture of the compost pile here where they're amending the bed and checking, in the magnifying glass for pests and using some drip irrigation. So vegetables and fruits can be hard work to grow, but we want to be doing it in the easiest way and the most environmentally friendly way, so you can get maximum yield while protecting the environment. So let's start by defining what is an edible landscape. And so it's just simply having edible fruits, vegetables, herbs, flowers in your backyard, in your landscape. Could be the front yard or the backyard. The context of this class is a residential kind of homeowner or resident setting. There's many names for this. People call it like, yeah, they want to have a food forest in their backyard, or you're practicing permaculture or agroecology. And all of these are founded upon similar principles of using efficient design, that you can get good yields with minimal inputs, and maybe even also working towards a more closed loop system where you're recycling some of your yard waste or doing other practices for sustainability. So, edible landscapes is like more on the homeowner scale. That's what this class is focused on. We're not really going to talk about commercial farming or production here, but we do have other classes if you're interested in that topic. So here are just some examples of an edible landscape. They can look a variety of ways. The picture on the left here, you can see the chayote squash growing up the trellis. And then they have some comfrey and pineapples here. And then the picture on the right, you can see the dwarf banana next to the Thai ginger. And there is this large elderberry tree in the background. So it can look more manicured or a little more natural, like a food forest here. Some of our goals for edible landscaping include grow food. And a great way to do this is to choose the right plants for your site. And we'll go over that extensively. And maintain your edibles in a Florida-friendly way, working towards sustainability. This picture here by Pete Canaris is of a yard that has broccoli growing in the front yard. So this is kind of a expert gardener here. Broccoli is more difficult to just grow in your front yard, but you have to have good soil and probably a constant water supply to do something like that. So this presentation is based off this publication here, Edible Landscaping, use the 9 Florida-friendly landscaping principles. And you can find this if you put a UF IFAS and then Google the title. And this goes over the 9 Florida-friendly principles and how they apply to maximizing, the food in your garden and doing it in an environmentally friendly way. So the first principle of Florida-friendly landscaping is the right plant in the right place. And on the picture to the left, you'll see our updated USDA plant hardiness zone map that was recently updated in the fall of 2023. And so you should look on this map and to see which hardiness zone you are in. Most parts of Central Florida are either in zone 9B or 10A. So you want to choose plants appropriately that are work well in your climate. So you also want to analyze your personal like site conditions, like what type of soil do you have? Is it sand? Is it clay? Maybe do a pH test to determine the pH and see what things grow good in that range. Also, the soil moisture, you might have some areas that are wet, some areas that are dry. The light, maybe full sun, part sun, full shade. You'll want to grow different plants according to all of these criteria here. And another thing is more like the hardscape and the views. Like, what do you want to look at when you look out your kitchen window? Do you want to see butterflies or a kitchen garden? Or maybe you want to try to block your neighbor with a hedge of fruit trees or something. Which views, are good or bad? So another important thing regarding climate is the microclimate effect. And here are some pictures of banana trees that all went through the freeze about 2 years ago. And you can see the one in the top left that is under the bamboo patch barely got any freeze damage at all. Whereas the picture on the bottom right here, which was just out in the open, that plant totally froze and the bananas were not able to make it to maturity. So the fruit was wasted too. So it's just important to observe this in your own yard where you might have a little microclimate, keeping it warmer or colder, maybe next to a water body or a rock wall could make a difference. Another important thing is selecting the right variety of fruits. So we also recommend this UF IFAS publication called Dooryard Fruit Varieties. And Jonathan Crane, one of the researchers here, is one of our statewide tropical fruit experts. And in this publication, they list specific varieties and which planting zone they do well in. This is just for Florida. So they have N for north, C for central, and S for south. So for example, if you're looking for a blackberry in central Florida, they recommend the following varieties like Brazos, Tupi, Flora Grand, and Ocklawaha. And so then when you go shopping at fruit tree nurseries, you can look for these certain varieties that, we know are well suited for your zone. So we can grow a large variety of fruits in Central Florida. Here are just a couple examples. We won't have time to go over every single fruit species and their requirements today, but you can get to know them and figure out which ones do well in your yard. If you have a large, hot, dry, sunny yard, you might want to do some mangoes and avocados and papayas. Whereas if you have a more shady or wet yard, something like the banana might be better, like gingers also like it moist and shady. So if you want to do vegetables, it's important to also not only plant the right plant in the right place, but plant them at the right time. And so here we're planting some green beans in the garden. And right now it's in the summertime, so seeds to plant for the warm season. We can plant some type of heat tolerant beans, such as the rattlesnake pole beans. Hot peppers do good right now, and also cherry tomatoes can withstand some Florida heat. Now, if you're into vegetables, you have to get a copy of our Florida Vegetable Gardening Guide. It's available for free online. Just Google UF IFAS Florida Vegetable Gardening Guide, and it will come right up. And so that lists all of the recommended varieties of vegetables for Florida. So great resource to have on hand. It gives you other tips on organic gardening and pest control. So a lot of great information. So when we're talking about edibles and plant selection and Florida friendly landscaping, we want to be choosing low maintenance edibles because they might have lower water needs. You know, they're more adapted or suitable for our climate. Perhaps slow growing things like a jaboticaba tree, you know, it grows very slowly. And so you don't have to prune it a lot. It just forms a nice tree. You know, other things might have a compact form. A main reoccurring theme here is that we're looking for perennial plants, you know, trees, shrubs, or long-lived annuals. For example, kale and collards, they're both about a, you know, 6-month crop, whereas something like lettuce or radishes are done in like 30 days. So you can have continual harvest off of some of these longer lived plants. And another big point is we're looking for plants that have no major pest or disease problems. So that's not a requirement, but you know, rosemary, like I have pictured here, that just does great. You don't have to barely water it, you know, it just is a real easygoing herb to grow. But say you're going to grow some cucumbers, well, you know, you're going to get those pickle worms that are going to infest your cucumber. So you just have to be prepared, you know, to spray a insecticide or a natural product to, you know, control the caterpillars. So I'm going to give you some example of low maintenance edibles, and we're going to start with vegetables here. So if you're a beginner gardener, I would start with these green beans. Green beans are one of the easiest crops to grow. They might get a little leaf damage from caterpillars or leaf miners, but rarely is the beans affected. So they take only about 60 days to harvest. So you can get a nice crop of those beans. It's good to plant them in the fall or the spring. Cherry tomatoes and hot peppers, like I mentioned, those are both things that can grow in the summer. And then kale is just one of my favorite vegetables because this grows almost year round here in Florida. It prefers the cooler winter months, but you can continually harvest those nice green leaves and put them in your salad or your soup or your stir fry. So another thing is to get Florida cultivars, things like the Seminole pumpkin or the Everglades tomato, because you know these have like Florida names. They're adapted to the Florida conditions. And another benefit of these is that they're heirloom plants, meaning that you can save the seed year after year and replant. And so you save those pumpkin seeds, and then next year plant them again, and it can just keep going, you know, year after year. And that's another important thing as a gardener, if you're looking for sustainability and closed loop systems, to be able to save your seed and propagate your own plants so you're not having to buy new seed all the time. Here's some low maintenance herbs like this Spanish tarragon in the top left, the turmeric in the top right, sorrel, these red calyxes from a hibiscus plant, and also holy basil. So most of the herbs are low maintenance and relatively long lived. So starting with a small herb garden is a great way for beginners to kind of get their feet wet in the garden. Lemongrass is another great one. You can make tea from the leaves. Here's some low maintenance fruits. Banana, if they're planted in the right place, that's nice and organic and wet, bananas will thrive. Figs are pretty low maintenance. Mulberry trees, like this first picture here, that's a very Florida friendly fruit tree. It just grows and bears lots of fruit. Birds also like to eat them if you like to garden for wildlife. Papayas are pretty easy to grow. The next one pictured here is the Jaboticaba, and that grows these little cherry looking grape things off of the stem of the tree. And pineapples, passion fruit, star fruit, those are all easy to grow, like low maintenance fruit trees. So next time you get a papaya to eat from the store, you can cut off the top and plant that in your garden. So some people want plants that are evergreen, that are gonna last like all year round and have leaves on them versus trees that are dormant and might lose their leaves in the winter and look a little barren. So here are just some examples of evergreen edibles. We have avocado, we have the cranberry or edible hibiscus, the jaboticaba, the olive tree, perennial spinach pictured here on the right, and also rosemary, starfruit as an evergreen tree. Other plants you might plant just for their ornamental value, like this variegated cassava here. It has this hot pink stem and then some white yellowish in the middle of the leaf, and it still makes the edible root. Loquat and starfruit are also nice, like shape of the trees, and they make a very nice landscape specimen plant. So depending on your needs, you know, in your garden, you might want something that is okay by your HOA. You might want something that looks good in the front yard, and maybe grow some of the more, you know, garden bed type of edibles in the backyard. So now I'm going to pass it over to Jan, and she's going to talk to you about edible landscaping design. Welcome, Jan.
Thank you, Tia. In the next group of slides, we'll be talking about some design considerations. There's a few things to keep in mind, especially if you're growing fruit and also some of the veggies. You need to know the general requirements of temperate, tropical, and subtropical fruits and their growing ranges in Florida. We're in Hillsborough County, and here the county is huge. So depending on whether you live in the north part or the south part can make a big difference. So that's the next thing. Be familiar with the climate conditions in your county and also even in your own backyard. You can have a microclimate going, which makes a difference. So specifying the fruits that are adapted and commonly grown in your county and any particular characteristics they require, that's another thing to keep in mind. So from there we go to site layout. And one of the first things you do before you even purchase a tree or a shrub to plant is to kind of assess your land. How much room do you have? How much sunlight falls on your property? Do you have a convenient water source nearby? For example, we love mulberries in my house, but those trees can grow 60 feet tall. So yeah, we kind of needed to figure out where was the best place to plant it on the property. Also, when that fruit falls, it will stain sidewalks and driveways and lanais and whatnot. So we certainly didn't want it close to anything like that. Vertical layering is something else to keep in mind. Using vertical layering, you can maximize the amount of plants you get, even in a small yard. And we're going to talk about that quite a bit in a minute. Chill requirements is another thing that we need to pay a special attention to here in Florida. There are different requirements depending upon which classification, especially fruit trees, are in. Temperate fruits need to have a certain number of chilling hours below 45 degrees. They need that so that the plant has a chance to rest and then resume its growth cycle by setting blossoms and fruit. If it doesn't get the certain number of chilling hours that it needs, what happens is you get sometimes You don't get the blossom set and the leafing out that you need. You can get inferior fruit or not so much. And if it doesn't get, if this happens over a number of years, it can really hurt the tree. It could even die. Tropical fruits don't need a certain amount of chilling hours per se, but your subtropical does. And these are often they need a certain number of hours in the 55 rather to 60 degree Fahrenheit range. And again, if the fruits don't get a certain number of hours below that 55 to 60 degree range for subtropical fruits, they don't flourish as well and they won't be as productive. UF has done a great job of developing some low chill varieties of fruit. I grow some of these in my yard for apples, blueberries, peaches, nectarines, and plums. So we really do have quite a bit of choice. If you look at this slide, there's a huge range in chilling hours in the entire state of Florida. Up in the Panhandle, 500-hour chilling hours is quite common. And then if you look at South Florida, 50 hours, chilling hours is more the norm. So it's important to keep track of what chilling hours are typical in the area that you live. I checked within my zip code and where I'm located, we got about 173 chilling hours last year, according to a USDA website. So it's something I do track quite closely, and it's important to keep this in mind. Another concept that goes with chilling hours is cold hardiness. And cold hardiness refers to what low temperatures that particular plant can withstand. A great example are avocados, as you see in the picture here. There are avocado types for Mexican avocado, for example, that I grow in my yard that has pretty high cold hardiness. They can withstand temperatures much lower. The other types, the Guatemalan and the West Indian types, are less cold hardy. So IFAS has wonderful publications on this. And before you buy a particular type of fruit tree, be sure to check out what sort of cold hardiness that plant might require. All right, I'd like to spend a little time talking about layers in a food forest. This drawing is by Graham Burnett, and it shows a way that you can effectively grow a considerable amount of food in less space than if you planted everything in very traditional, nice, neat rows. This drawing shows 7 layers in a food forest or a food garden. And you see the canopy layer is the tallest, and those are large fruit and nut trees, followed by lower tree layers and shrub layers, and then herbaceous layers, rhizosphere layers, which are your root vegetables, but they also have leaves, which can help shade the ground, and ground covers in the soil surface, and then a vertical layer. So you've got plants that are growing up, which again helps maximize the space. You'll see there's a vining plant that's around the tall tree in the canopy layer. So what you have here is a way to plant that maximizes the food you produce, and it also, I think, results in a lot less work. There are some advantages in planting this way. You can plant thickly and fit more plants in an area. And by doing that, then you reduce the amount of weeds. You also use ground covers to shade the soil and help keep moisture in so you don't have to water as much. You can plant a diverse array of plants that attract beneficial insects to your food garden to pollinate the fruit crops. And then what's great is you end up fooling some of the pests that might harm your food and your fruit trees, because there's not a nice linear row for that pest to go down and munch on all the plants. the pests have a harder time finding plants that they want to damage in a food forest like this because there's so much more diversity. Those tall trees too in the canopy layer help provide a nice windbreak for the trees in the understory and lower layers in the shrubs. And then if those trees are deciduous, those taller trees, their leaf drop and the natural senescence of branches and leaves returns natural fertilizers to the land and helps create healthy soil. Dead leaves are great compost. So many benefits in planting in a food forest in this fashion. Next, we're going to talk about some of the possibilities for a canopy layer. A nice possibility are mango trees. These can get very tall, and so they're a great option for the canopy layer. There are no cold tolerant varieties. I live in North Hillsborough County, so I do not plant mango trees. I'm just afraid we get freezes and frost, not every year, but often enough. But I do plant a white sapote instead, which is more cold tolerant and grows really tall, and that I'm using as a canopy layer instead of a mango. Another great option for a canopy layer is an avocado tree. And I did mention earlier that there are different varieties of avocados, and they vary in cold hardiness. So it's important to check on which type you've got. These grow very tall too, up to 65 feet tall, 25 feet wide. And you do kind of have to scout them out for laurel wilt disease. They are affected by that. But if you buy from a reputable place, you can get disease-free plants. I've got one that's flourishing beautifully in my yard, and my neighbors keep walking by wondering when the fruit's going to ripen. It usually produce enough that you can share with your neighbors, which is a good thing. Another great option for a canopy layer is the mulberry tree. And I mentioned that earlier. These are great trees. They're different varieties. You can get dwarf varieties, which are very delicious. I've got a Pakistani black mulberry in my yard, which has huge fruit on them, just delicious. There's also a white mulberry, which is quite different. If you're worried about it staining the concrete near your house, that's one option. There's also a native red mulberry tree that actually does pretty well in shade. Most of the mulberries need more sun, but the native Florida red mulberry can tolerate more shade. So they would do well maybe under really tall oak trees. So one thing to be aware of is the invasive paper mulberry. Be sure that you don't inadvertently get that, and it's not allowed to flourish on your property. Next, we get to the understory layer, and this is the smaller trees, usually about up to 30 feet tall. One of the great ones that we can grow here in Central Florida is the starfruit tree, also called carambola. And there are two kinds. There's a tart kind and a sweet kind. If you've ever had someone pick one of the sweet ones from their tree and give it to you right off the tree, it is absolutely delicious. There's quite a few of my family members thought that starfruit was too sour or too tart, and they obviously never had one of these sweet varieties. These trees really do well as an understory layer. They fruit abundantly. They do need protection from the wind, so that's why it's a good idea to plant them under a canopy layer. They're not very drought tolerant either, so that's another reason for planting them under other taller trees, so that those trees kind of help shade the soil and keep it a little more moist for these starfruit trees. Banana, as Tia mentioned, great tree, understory tree. I've got several different varieties in my yard. I have the dwarf variety, the finger variety, and also plantains, many cultivars. These are fantastic. understory layer options here. They do need protection, as Tia mentioned, frost and freezes. Mine will die back in the winter. I've got them planted on the south side of my house, and they're protected somewhat by both the house and some larger oak trees. But in falling frost will sometimes damage them enough, but they always come back after the spring, even with frost damage. They do require some maintenance to produce well. They need moist, fertile soil, full sun, and because our Florida soils are often pretty sandy, you're probably going to need to give them a little extra fertilizer. If they don't get enough water, they can be slow to fruit or not produce much, not produce well. Another great understory layer tree is the papaya. I've grown these. I will always have these in my yard. I just love papaya. Year-round fruiting begins about 9 months after planting. These are fast-growing trees. They can produce a prodigious amount of fruit, as you can see on the photo on this slide. One thing to be careful about, and this is why it's important to plant them under something else, they are susceptible to wind damage. I had a papaya tree that looked just like the one in the picture that I wasn't paying attention. I didn't take some of the fruit off, and the whole thing fell over in a windstorm, and I lost a lot of fruit. When you choose papaya trees, it's important to keep in mind that there are 3 sexes. There's a male papaya tree that flowers only, and if it does produce fruit, it's not very good fruit. There's a female that produces fruit, but it needs a male tree nearby. And then there's a hermaphrodite tree, which has both sexes on the plant. It's bisexual, and it can self-pollinate and produce plenty of fruit on its own. Happily, most of the papaya plants sold in nurseries are bisexual, but it's important to check, make sure you ask that you're getting a tree that will fruit. Good if you're planting them in a pot to be able to bring them in case it gets cold or to protect them more easily. You probably want to plant at least 3 seeds in the pot. That makes sure that you're going to get some fruiting. The next layer is the shrub layer. Elderberry is a great option for us here in Florida. These grow about 12 feet high and wide. They will also sucker. They send out little shoots and they'll spread nicely. The flowers are lovely. The flowers in the spring are white, lacy, and they grow in clusters. And then the clusters of flowers eventually turn into little green berries, which will then turn this purple or almost black color. They're great for fruits and flowers can be used for wine and tinctures and syrups and teas. It's important though, if you harvest them, make sure the berries are all black or purple because the green ones can have some toxicity. You don't want to be eating those. Blueberry is also another great option for our shrub layer. With blueberries, they don't grow quite as tall as elderberries, about 6 feet high and wide. We grow great blueberries here in Florida. If the soil is acidic, it needs lower pH soil, like 5.5 pH or below. That is not possible in my yard. My yard tends toward alkaline soils. I really have to watch it. So I've been considering growing them in containers where I can put in this especially mixed soil that's a lot that has the right pH level. There are blueberry farms here in Florida where beautiful blueberry bushes are grown in large container pots in rows. The next layer is the herbaceous layer, and this is very diverse. It includes everything from pineapples to squashes to eggplants to peppers, collards, herbs, flowers. This herbaceous layer is extremely important for covering the ground. So it helps keep your weeds down. It helps provide a diverse options, ways to grow a lot of food in less space. And also it helps in kind of fooling the pests because you've got such a range of plants that you can choose from. Ground cover layers, this is great for excluding weeds. Some wonderful options are Seminole pumpkins, like Tia mentioned, sweet potato vines, black-eyed peas. These will kind of grow rapidly and cover nice swaths of your ground, and then it keeps the weeds down, so you don't have to be working so hard. It also makes the soil stay a little more moist and keeps the temperature down in our hot summers. Sweet potato vines and Seminole pumpkins, black-eyed peas, they do pretty well in our hot weather, better than most plants. Rhizosphere is the next food layer for your edible landscape. And these are plants that were an important part of the plant grows underground. That's what you want to harvest. Your sweet potatoes, obviously, jicama, regular potatoes, carrots, onions, and leeks all have the food that is underground. But what's really great about these rhizosphere plants is that their leaves also provide some protection for the soil and for shading out weeds on the top layer. And then the last layer to consider in our forest, food forest, is the vine layer. This is great because these plants grow well on trellises or fences. They even use the trees nearby as scaffolding, and you can really maximize the food you produce in your food forest by growing up and using less ground space. Some good options are passion fruits. I've got some growing along a fence line in my backyard. Grapes, chayote, dragon fruit, pole beans. All of these are great viney plants. As I mentioned at the beginning, you don't have to grow all 7 layers to have a successful food forest and to be able to see some of the benefits of designing your edible landscape by planting in layers. Even if you plant just a few layers, 2 or 3, you can cut down on your workload and increase your food production. So, okay, Tia, back to you.
Yeah, I know there's so many delicious, fruits and vegetables out there to grow. So Jan touched on a couple. Next, I'm going to transition to maintaining your edible landscape in a Florida-friendly way. Things like adding compost, mulch, fertilizer, how to control the pests, and also watering. So let's start with a little bit about Florida's soil. As you can see in this photo here, it is much of Florida's soil is very sandy, which is good for drainage, but bad for like nutrient and water holding capacity. We have a high risk of leaching here. That's why we have a lot of fertilizer bans in the summer with the nitrogen and the phosphorus. Our Florida soil also has low cation exchange capacity, CEC, and that's just a fancy word for ability to hold nutrients. So the way that we remedy that is we add compost, which will improve our soil fertility. It will help with the soil health and structure, contains beneficial microorganisms. And so compost is just your decomposed food scraps, your yard waste, and you can break them down into, some rich, crumbly, soil-like substance in your compost pile in your backyard, or you could buy compost, by the yard or buy the bagged kind. And so you can pretty much add compost to everything, potting soil, garden beds, fruit trees, vegetable beds, or you can brew it in water and make a compost tea. So compost is very important, and there are a variety of ways you can make that. The picture on the left here, this is like the 3 compartment bin where you have the active pile and then the resting and the ready to harvest pile. You can also use a worm composting bin where the worms will eat your food scraps and produce high quality compost. There's various containers. You check with your local municipality and see if they give away any. The UF IFAS extension here in Hillsborough County, we do have a composting class that you get a free composting bin with, and then just trying to recycle all your food scraps from your house. So we have this publication, Recycling Organic Materials to Improve in Your Florida-Friendly Landscape. And it goes beyond just composting and mulching, but it also talks about landscape practices like raking your leaves into your garden beds. When you mow your lawn, you can use the mulching setting, and that will let the grass clippings, break down and fertilize your yard. So a lot of different practices in here you can do. Mulch is really important. We recommend a 2 to 3 inch layer of mulch, and you can use various materials, pine bark, pine straw, fallen leaves. Don't let your leaves go to waste. Keep them in bags in the back of your house, or spread them out on your landscape areas or around your fruit trees. You can also sign up to get some free utility mulch from chipdrop.com. So we're not endorsing them, but it is a website. You can go and they will deliver some of the tree trimmer mulch to your house. So the Melaleuca mulch, that's made from the invasive species. We just do not recommend cypress mulch, as that is a wetland tree and we're not always sure of the source. It's not always disclosed. So if you get really advanced in your forest gardening and your edible landscape, you might want to try to grow all of your own mulch rather than importing your mulch and such. So there's certain plants that are known for being really good for a technique. This is a permaculture technique called chop and drop. And on the picture on the left here, you see the bananas, where after you harvest the bunch of bananas, then you can cut all the leaves off the tree and cut the banana stump. And since it's a ginger relative, it's very herbaceous. They break down very quickly. And so this is a good practice as long as you don't have any banana disease. Now the photo on the right is pigeon peas, or also known as gandules. And these are a legume, and most legumes fix nitrogen. And so every time you chop and drop, from nitrogen fixing plants like these peas, that vegetation is going to be on the ground and release the nutrients. And so here you're kind of creating your own mulch and building soil fertility with the nitrogen and then the carbon. Bunching grasses like mully grass or vetiver grass or lemongrass, that's also a good choice for having your own little hay factory in your backyard. And you can chop and drop these a couple times a year to create more mulch. So I want to mention real quick here about compost versus fertilizer. So compost is organic and it builds the soil health. It's not really considered a fertilizer because it does not have a guaranteed analysis. Compost does have some nutrients, maybe like 1% nitrogen, but it's not considered a fertilizer because it doesn't really get that laboratory test for the guaranteed analysis. Whereas like fertilizer, it can be organic fertilizer or it can be inorganic fertilizer. And it's more specifically to add nutrients. Like for this example here, the 1608, that is a good turf fertilizer with 16% nitrogen and 8% potassium. So it has a more specific rate and maybe source. You can get fertilizers in different blends. Nitrogen is more for plant leaves, whereas the phosphorus and potassium are more for the plant roots and flowering. So be sure to check your fertilizer ordinance and look at the rules for your municipality, whether if you're in the city of Tampa or city of Orlando or Hillsborough County, unincorporated county. So look up your rules because a lot of fertilizer is banned. The nitrogen and the phosphorus, which are the first two numbers during the summer months, which correlates with our rainy season, because we don't want these nutrients to be lost and enter our water bodies. We want them to go to the plants and be absorbed by the plants. So compost is okay to add at all times, even in the summer months if you have a fertilizer ban, whereas fertilizer, you need to follow the fertilizer rules. So some good times to, fertilize or add compost is, after transplanting, when you see the plant, has put out some new roots and is starting to grow, that's a good time to give it a little bit of food. Here's some organic fertilizer granulars, sprinkling around this Seminole pumpkin plant here. And then another good time is when you see flowers and fruit. And that time you might want to switch to more nitrogen and use more phosphorus and potassium to feed the flowers and the fruit at that time. And so that's when a plant needs some extra energy at those growth stages. Now, when you're fertilizing fruit trees, you want to fertilize out to the drip line of the plant. That's where the edge of the leaves come down, because that's where a lot of active feeding roots are going to be. And you want to avoid putting any fertilizer right by the trunk of the tree. The fertilizer can damage the trunk, or it might, promote insects or disease in that area. So give it a couple inches, of fertilizer free zone. And, you want to look at the specific fruit tree that you're growing, because everything will have a different recommendation. We have a UF IFAS publication on growing avocado. We have one on growing mango. We have one on growing banana. And so look at the tables, the fertilizer tables in the back of these publications to see what is the proper amount and what is the guaranteed analysis that you want to be putting out and what is the timing. And then also with fruit trees, you might want to consider doing a foliar micronutrient spray, maybe once a year, for things like boron, copper, zinc, and manganese, which, just helps to uptake through the leaves a little bit better than in the soil. So next, moving on to pest control, we recommend using the least toxic pest control first. For example, see this squash here, this yellow crookneck squash. The fruit are rotted. It's not a fungal disease, but it's actually this little pickle worm here. See the green caterpillar in the leaf curl. And so to use the least toxic pest control, we would start with something organic and natural, such as BT, which is short for Bacillus thuringiensis, which is a bacterium that you spray on the leaf, and then when the caterpillar eats it, it gets an upset tummy. Also, insecticidal soap and neem oil are also good examples of organic and natural products. So we have a whole UF IFAS publication on this called Natural Products for Managing Landscape and Garden Pests in Florida, which lists out all of these products and how to use them and what insects they're good for. A bigger part of pest control is just the concept of creating an ecological landscape where you're not even using any type of spray or pest control at all. Instead, you are attracting beneficial insects to your garden by planting flowers and native plants. And what happens is the predators in your garden, like this parasitoid wasp, they're gonna lay their eggs or parasitize, the pest and kill it. So here the wasp lays its eggs in the tomato hornworm, and you can see the eggs, the white eggs coming out of the caterpillar, and that eventually kills the caterpillar. So that's how you can, create a more ecological landscape, attracting the beneficial pests and reducing pesticides overall. So there's many, many beneficial insects. If you ever find an insect in your yard and you're not sure about it, you can find your local extension office and send them pictures by email. Just some examples of beneficial insects and pollinators include bees, butterflies, ladybugs, hoverflies, lacewings, parasitic wasps, praying mantis, minute pirate bugs, Swartsky mites. There's just all kinds of stuff. That's just a short list there. And then what are these guys eating? Well, they're eating aphids, they're eating caterpillars, they're eating mealybugs, and so, this is their food source. So it's okay to have aphids in your garden, because then you're going to attract the ladybugs who are going to come and feed on them. So we just want to have a nice, healthy buffet of all sorts of bugs, and they'll kind of keep each other in check. So how do you get all these good bugs? Well, you have to plant flowers. And some easy to grow flowers include the black-eyed Susan, the blanket flower, there's cosmos, coreopsis, pentas, zinnias, all kinds of flowers, especially native plants, attract a ton of insects that are beneficial to your garden. So next, I'm going to talk about watering and irrigation. So a key point here is that irrigation should be supplemental to rainfall. So you wait and you see if it rains. If it doesn't rain, then you might need to irrigate if your plants are dry or thirsty, or you need to keep your seeds wet. So once you have established plants in your garden, like after they've been alive and well rooted, they generally need about 1 inch of water per week. And then some plants are going to be thirstier. Some plants can be more drought tolerant, but a good strategy is to plant plants together by their water needs, or even if you're sprouting seeds, keep all your seedlings together, because they're going to need watered pretty much every day. And then adjust as needed. As the plants get bigger, they might need more or less water. Every plant is a little different. So observing your landscape and, paying attention to when the soil gets dry, because the plants don't want to be wet all the time either, because that can cause fungal diseases. So let the plants dry out a little bit, and then once you see them wilt, then water them again. Wait a couple days. So if you are going to irrigate, hand watering is actually the most efficient method as for water conservation, just spot watering whatever needs watered, but it's not always practical. So if you want to set up an irrigation system, the micro irrigation, such as drip irrigation, micro sprays, or bubblers, these are really great ways to conserve water and make sure your plants are hydrated. So you can see this drip irrigation line in a row of collard greens. Next to it is some tomatoes, and they're doing perfectly fine. Every system, you'll need to adjust it here and there. Something like a drip for a plant this big, like this big collard, that drip irrigation might need to run for about an hour or so. Now, if you have, sprinklers for large areas, then the rotor spray heads are more efficient than the traditional ones. So you can consider, replacing your traditional spray heads with these rotary spray heads, and they just water more slowly and distribute the water kind of like rain, like gentle little raindrops. So there's less runoff. You will have to increase the runtime a little bit. So I'm going to wrap up here with some resources. You can look up our publications online, and especially the UF Fruitscapes website, which you can get details on growing pretty much any fruit for Florida. And so be sure to take note of those and check them out. And I'd like to thank you for tuning in to our webinar. If you have any plant questions, you can email us or give us a call here at the Extension Center. And please scan this little QR code with your phone to take our survey. So thanks for tuning in, and you guys have a great afternoon.